Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, July 11th, 7/11. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, we should remind everyone on this 7/11. 7-Eleven turns 96 years old today and is giving away free Slurpees. It's Free Slurpee Day.
So you just go and you get it. You don't have to do anything.
That's my understanding. I haven't done it in a few years, but the last time I went through with the free Slurpee on 7-Eleven at 7-Eleven, it was a pretty straightforward process.
It's also 1 year since my 7-Eleven baby was born. My son was born on 7-Eleven.
Happy birthday, Grayson. I recall the text that day. If I remember correct, you were shopping for an outfit to go home in from the hospital, and Grayson decided to show up.
Correct. So which you'll also remember, I had COVID for the first time after 3 years of a pandemic in my 9th month of pregnancy, which was extremely frustrating and interesting. So we were sort of behind in the prep for getting ready because I had kind of like 3 weeks. It was probably like 8.5 months. So the last 3 weeks, I just couldn't do anything, couldn't shop, couldn't get out of bed for a while, actually. And then I'm finally feeling good, ready to get back out there, go shopping for the outfit to take the baby home from the hospital in. I was at Denny's, which is a popular store around these parts on Long Island, and my water broke, and the rest is history.
Well, happy birthday, Grayson. And we will let you know as my wife Alex is in her 3rd trimester what our baby has in store for us. Let's hope, hopefully nothing dramatic, everything very smooth in the coming months.
I'm sure it will be. Let's get to some news. Some new numbers show that the South has become America's new economic powerhouse with $100 billion in wealth moving there in just a couple of years. The mysterious Russian mutiny getting even more mysterious. We learned that rebel leader Yevgeny Prigozhin has now met face-to-face with Putin, and they talked new job opportunities.
And this is confirmed by the Kremlin. We'll get into that in just a second, but it's mind-blowing. We're still trying to figure it out.
It also looks like there is a deal to let Sweden into NATO after Turkey drops its opposition. Former USA Olympic coach Larry Nassar, who was convicted of sexually assaulting gymnasts, has been stabbed in a federal prison. The new social media app Threads announces that it has more than 100 million members in less than a week, and it appears to be taking a bite out of Twitter traffic. How Elon Musk is responding. And it might be time to take that trip to Disney World. New numbers show attendance is down this summer. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, one of my favorite historical events, the day that Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton. It's probably now one of the most famous events given the popularity of the Broadway musical, but we'll get into that and a couple other headlines on this day.
Let's start with some major economic news in the United States. Some new government figures show that for the first time, the 6 fastest growing states in the South, Florida, Texas, Georgia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee, are contributing more to the national GDP than the Northeast is. This switch happened during the pandemic, and it shows no sign of reverting. So a flood of transplants helped steer about $100 billion in new income to the Southeast in 2020 and 2021 alone, while the Northeast bled out about $60 billion based on an analysis of recently published IRS data. The Southeast accounted for more than 2/3 of all job growth across the U.S. since early 2020, almost doubling its pre-pandemic share. And it was home to 10 of the 15 fastest growing American large cities. So Nashville's become the country's top real estate supernova in surveys by PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Urban Land Institute. Houston, Atlanta, and Charlotte rank among the top 10 moving destinations nationwide by Penske Truck Rental. And no one beats Fort Worth, Texas, near Dallas, the country's fastest growing big city in the latest Census Bureau data.
Home to my parents now that they moved from Chicago. They're part of this trend line. Actually, not even accounted for because this only takes us through 2021, Jill. It's a fascinating trend line. Of the 9 fastest growing cities in the South, 6 of them were in Texas. So a lot of people headed down there. 2.2 million people migrated to Florida and across the Southeast in the past 2 years. That's effectively the size of the city of Houston. That's how many people have made their way southeast. Now, as recently as 2005, not even 20 years ago, the Northeast share of national GDP economic output was just about 24%, while those 6 states in the South that we talk about were just under 22%. In 2022, the numbers flipped. Now, this has been a long-term trend, but everything really sped up during COVID. You can go back to 1950. That's when the Northeast had about 28% of the population. Those 6 states in the South had 16%. By 1996, the South share of the population already exceeded the Northeast. And then in 2022, you now have 26%, 1 out of 4 Americans now living in one of those 6 states, whereas less than 1 in 5 Americans now live in the Northeast. The CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, earlier this year said on Bloomberg that JP Morgan, the bank, now has more employees in Texas than New York State. He added it didn't have to be that way. One criticism is the tax burden in New York. So when it comes to the rationale here, obviously there's the weather, right? People just realizing I don't need to sit through the cold winter in the Northeast. Then on top of that, restrictive zoning laws, land use laws, housing costs. The typical price of a home in New York City is double that a home in Charlotte. The business startup environment, very challenging in the Northeast. Again, a lot of regulations, a lot of taxes, not so much in the Southeast. The Southeast also has a number of states where you don't have a state income tax. Whereas in New York, for example, if you live in New York City, you're paying a New York City income tax, you're paying a New York State income tax, and you're paying federal taxes on top of other taxes. And so you're left here with the situation where the South is this powerhouse, the Northeast, which already had high taxes in a number of these states. Now that the population is moving, the tax base is moving, well, what are they going to need to do to make up for that? Well, they got to raise taxes again on the people who are left. So it'll be very interesting to see if there's some creative strategies here by the Northeast to get people back, because there was this wake-up call during COVID.
Moshe, not to get too personal, but what made the Wanunus choose to move to Texas?
Parents want to retire in a warm place after several decades in Chicago. So that was definitely my father's priority. But also just the freedom, the land, but the weather was most important to them. I mean, retirees have always made their way down south. You know, what's key here is you have working age population also making their way south in record numbers. Again, the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee and Texas here. Jill, having been in Nashville recently, as well as Charleston, South Carolina, you know, locals there have been talking about how prices have gotten astronomical. Now, as a New Yorker, compared to New York prices, not that expensive, not as expensive, but by the standards and by history in those places, very expensive. So there are definitely some issues here. It's not an all positive story for everybody. The people who are relocating, good for them. The people who were local, seeing the prices skyrocket when it comes to real estate, when it comes to other things there, that's become a challenge. And so, you know, given how quickly this has moved, it'll be interesting to watch how this unfolds now in Texas and Tennessee and South Carolina, Georgia, et cetera, in the coming years.
It'll also be interesting to see if the politics in those states change. Many of them solidly red. So will they become purple? Younger people tend to be more democratic. So we'll see.
And we've already seen a bit of it in Georgia, especially, right? Though, interestingly, in the past midterm, you saw Florida go even redder, despite the move. And so that could speak to also the type of people, politically speaking, who are moving to some of these states. So, you know, there's going to be, this is going to have an impact socially, this is going to have an impact economically, and this is certainly, as you noted, going to have an impact politically. And even the pollsters out there who are going to try to gauge what happens in the 2024 election in some of these states, given the wholesale change, the number of people coming in there, it's going to be hard to predict based on past trend lines, given, again, the migration numbers that we've seen.
Okay, let's head abroad where things just keep getting weirder, for lack of a better word, in Russia after last month's attempted mutiny. We learned on Monday that Russian President Vladimir Putin held a lengthy meeting with Yevgeny Prigozhin just 5 days after his Wagner private military company launched a brief mutiny. This was confirmed by a Kremlin spokesperson who added that, quote, further employment options for the mercenary group were among the matters discussed. What? I don't even know what to say.
Well, they all need jobs. And so, Jill, they were discussing what happened and like, okay, what do you guys want to do next?
It is the first known contact between the two men since Wagner's uprising on June 24th. That uprising, which killed more than a dozen Russian airmen and led tanks to get within 120 miles of Moscow, posed the most dramatic challenge to Putin's authority in his more than 2 decades in power. Putin reportedly invited 35 people to a 3-hour meeting on June 29th, including Prigozhin and all of Wagner's top commanders. The details of any agreements potentially reached at the meeting still unclear, and Prigozhin hasn't said anything about it since that failed mutiny. The fighters shared their version of events and reportedly also pledged their loyalty to the Russian president.
Jill, the Russian spokesperson, this is Dmitry Peskov. So this is somebody very close to Putin. And the reason why you can go with this is like literally Peskov is saying this, makes it sound like this kumbaya moment. Like, oh, they just got together after the mutiny that killed multiple Russian airmen, had Wagner criticize the leadership, want to take out the defense minister, took out our Southern Command, took over our Ukraine war operation in the south, took over a southern city, ran tanks up to 120 miles within Moscow, led us to dig ditches to try to block their tanks. But sure, they had a meeting 5 days later to discuss what happened. Putin wanted to hear them out, wanted to hear what was on their minds. It sounds very much like the Vladimir Putin that we know.
What's next for you in your career? What are you thinking?
I understand we've had some differences lately. How can we work this out? It does reinforce the old adage, you keep your friends close, but you keep your enemies closer. And that's the sense here from people who watch the Kremlin and are trying to understand what's happening here. The meeting itself, though, the fact that there was a face-to-face meeting 5 days after the mutiny, still extraordinary. Remember, Putin went on television, branded Prigozhin a traitor, said that these people engaged in this revolt, he vowed harsh punishment against them, a criminal case. Now the criminal case has been dropped. This is not going to be popular amongst Russian military leaders. Remember, Prigozhin here was critical, saying, take out your defense minister, take out your military head. Well, those guys are still in charge, and they're hearing that Putin's also having this meeting on the side. So Putin is trying to strike this delicate balance, condemning his biggest threat to his rule, but also not alienating him, but also trying to give some love to the defense minister and the military chief. And remember, we still haven't seen Prigozhin on camera, Jill, for a couple weeks now since that mutiny. What's that all about? And so we're still waiting to see that as his reports come out. Remember the Wagner Group, they have led some of the biggest victories for Russia in the invasion of Ukraine. They've also been on the front lines of conflicts around the world. Remember, Putin likes this mercenary group, or he has liked this mercenary group, because they're engaged in stuff in the Middle East and Africa that he doesn't have to take responsibility for. War crimes, bolstering authoritarian leaders and engaging in some really dirty, terrible things. And so he had them. They've done a lot of stuff for him. Clearly, there's been some issue here with Prigozhin, but not so much of an issue that he didn't, have tea with him, so to speak.
They broke bread. That's a big deal. All right, time now for the speed read from the New York Times. NATO is set to fully accept Sweden into the alliance this week. The announcement came Monday as Turkey, which was blocking Sweden from joining, agreed to clear the way for Sweden. It was a sudden reversal just hours after President Erdogan said that the European Union should first advance his country's bid to join that economic union. Erdogan lifted his objections to Sweden's entry into NATO after they struck an agreement that both would continue to work bilaterally against terrorism. Sweden would help reinvigorate Turkey's application to enter the EU, and NATO would establish a new, quote, special coordinator for counterterrorism.
Jill, it comes as the big NATO summit gets underway today in Lithuania. Turkey's demands also included that Sweden crack down on dissidents whom Turkey considers terrorists. This includes pro-Kurdish activists and members of a religious group that Turkey accuses of planning a coup back in 2016. Remember, the way NATO works is it has to be unanimous, and effectively Turkey has been holding up Sweden's application now for nearly a year. There's also been talk privately, Jill. So, Jill, that's what's public here in terms of the agreement. We don't know what promises were made behind the scenes. There was talk of weaponry going to Turkey, potentially from Sweden, potentially from the U.S. It could be a multilateral thing. I imagine more details will come out in the coming days. Interestingly, you mentioned that Turkey wants in on the European Union. So you have NATO, which is the military alliance. Then you have the European Union, which is the big economic alliance. Turkey has been trying to join the EU since 1987, and effectively their application has gone nowhere. One of the issues is the rise of authoritarianism in Turkey as Erdogan has really taken control and started to take apart certain democratic parts of Turkey. We should note that EU officials were very quick to reject the demand that Turkey is allowed in here, saying this is a separate issue. Sweden and NATO is very separate from Turkey in the EU, but it sounds here like Sweden will help Turkey, or at least make the case, make the pitch for them here. But I wouldn't think short term Turkey gets into the EU here. Turkey also has a lot of economic issues, and the EU is trying to remain stable as an economic union. They've had some issues with some of the countries they've taken on in recent years, especially in Southern Europe, vis-a-vis Northern Europe. So now when it comes to NATO, Sweden officially becomes the 32nd member of NATO. If you look at a map, it now is looking more like Putin's worst nightmare, especially post-Ukraine, as Finland and Sweden both join NATO. So if you look at the Russian border with Europe, it is nearly all NATO countries. And that was not the case 20 years ago when Putin first took power. And so what this means along those borders going forward is a question. But at the same time, Europe feels threatened. Countries like Sweden and Finland, who felt they didn't need to be part of the alliance for decades, now feel post-Ukraine that they need to be protected by the NATO alliance. NATO alliance, what is core to it is if one country is invaded or is attacked, all countries respond on behalf of that country. And that's why NATO membership is so important. That's why Ukraine is seeking it. Though, as we mentioned yesterday, they're not going to see it anytime soon. But look for more headlines this week in relation to Ukraine, Russia, and NATO as this summit takes place.
From the Associated Press, Larry Nassar, the former USA Gymnastics and Michigan State doctor who was convicted of sexually abusing numerous underage female gymnasts, has reportedly been stabbed while serving his sentence at a federal prison in Florida. The attack happened Sunday. Nassar was in stable condition on Monday. Sources said Nassar had been stabbed multiple times in the back and in the chest. The two officers guarding the unit where Nassar was held were working mandated overtime shifts because of staffing shortages, according to a source.
Jill, this is the latest incident of violence that we've seen in a federal prison. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein somehow was allowed to commit suicide, right? We saw Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, commit suicide recently. There have been multiple. Whitey Bulger was attacked. You know, the famous mafioso from Boston was attacked in federal prison in recent years. And the argument here goes that federal prisons are understaffed right now. You know, they made a point of saying those guys were on OT shifts. They don't have enough staff to deal with everyone in the prison. Nevertheless, Nassar certainly has no shortage of enemies here. He's been in prison since 2017 after pleading guilty to sexually abusing underage girls while serving as the team doctor for USA Gymnastics and for the Michigan State Gymnastics team. More than 250 women have come forward to accuse Nassar of sexually abusing them. That includes, by the way, Olympic gold medalists Simone Biles, Allie Raisman, Michaela Maroney, Gabby Douglas, who you might know from previous Summer Olympic Games. A judge sentenced him to between 40 to 175 years in prison for those crimes. Nassar's also serving a 60-year federal prison sentence for possessing 37,000 images of child pornography. He's also been convicted of sexual abuse in Michigan and sentenced to between 40 to 125 years in prison there. And, you know, typically people convicted of those types of crimes, Jill, tend to not do very well in prison.
From CNBC, Twitter traffic is tanking as Meta's Threads hits 100 million users since its debut last week. Threads launched in the United States Wednesday and is being touted by Meta executives like Instagram chief Adam Mosseri as a more positive public square for communities that never, quote, really embraced Twitter. So far, users seem to be on board. CEO Mark Zuckerberg said in a post, quote, that's mostly organic demand, and we haven't even turned on many promotions yet. Can't believe it's only been 5 days. Twitter does appear to have taken a hit. According to SimilarWeb, it's a data company that specializes in web analytics. Web traffic to Twitter was down 5% for the first 2 full days that Threads was generally available compared to the previous week. The company said Twitter's web traffic down 11% compared to the same days in 2022.
And Jill, while there's no official comment from Twitter, Elon does not appear to be taking it well over on Twitter. Several tweets over the weekend really going obscene when it comes to Mark Zuckerberg. Elon Musk tweeting at one point, Zuck is a cuck, which is an offensive term for a weak man. At another point, he tweeted that he wants to challenge Zuckerberg to a literal measuring contest of their manly parts.
So you know the expression, they're saying the quiet part out loud? I mean, that's really what he's doing.
You know, he tries to play this off as like this is a joke, but I mean, Elon Musk, I mean, you're the richest man in the world with all these companies. What are you doing with these tweets? But this is what he's doing. Clearly upset by the publicity that Threads is getting so far. I mean, they're certainly helped by the existing social network Instagram, which has nearly 2 billion users, Jill. So 100 million of those have immediately connected into Threads here. There are estimates that they could see up to 200 million, and this could add up to $8 billion in revenue for Meta in the next year. And the app still has a lot of room to grow here. It hasn't launched yet in Europe, where they're still navigating regulatory complexity, aka privacy challenges, because in Europe they have much more restrictive laws when it comes to privacy and use of data, and they're not sure whether Meta meets those standards yet. Keep in mind, Meta collects the same amount that Facebook and Instagram collect, but they collect more than Twitter collects on you, including when you download, for example, if you're an iPhone user and you download Threads. And by the way, if you already have Facebook or Instagram downloaded, it has access to your health app on Apple. So they're getting that data on you. And Jill, we should mention there was some controversy over the weekend. Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram here, head of Threads, saying that he isn't seeing news and politics as a big part of Threads. That got some pushback. We say here at Mo News, challenge accepted. But they're saying over at Threads, like, we want it to be a happy place, and news and politics is depressing, and we're not going to make a point of pushing it there. But as most social media companies have found in the past few years, as much as you try to avoid it, it'll come for you. And so they're going to have to figure out how to navigate that.
So I was trying to figure out if some media outlets, if they had a different strategy for Threads versus Twitter. And the few that I've been checking out, it seems like they're basically just tweeting and threading the same exact thing.
Like a copy paste situation.
They're basically just posting their same articles. So it appears the strategy, at least right now, is exactly the same on both platforms.
Right. Thread said, we're not here to replace Twitter, but as far as the users are concerned, it's basically a replacement. And you're seeing Thread traffic go up and Twitter traffic go down, and a lot of people hit copy paste on their tweets. And some people are trying to make both continue to work because they're making a bet on both, but that appears to be it. Though, Jill, I still find it frustrating on Thread so far that searchability is really terrible. Like, I was trying to, learn more about the Prigozhin story, and you can't search topics yet or hashtags on Threads, whereas on Twitter I can. On Threads, you can only search people's handles, people's names. So people named Prigozhin is all that came up for me when I did that search on Threads.
And had you searched Wagner, yours truly would have come up.
Right. If I searched Wagner Group, all I would have gotten was your Twitter handle, or Threads handle, I should say.
But to the point that I was making a few days ago, when I went on Twitter today, what was trending? The Jews. And it was quite negative. And honestly, it was quite stressful, some of the comments. And I left Twitter just feeling worse about society and worse about everything.
Jill, I think I'm going to delete your Twitter account. You haven't had a good experience there for a very long time. I think it's time to quit.
Probably for my mental health. I think that's a good idea.
I'll check Twitter so you don't have to.
The only people who message me on Twitter anymore are the people who think I am the Jill Wagner who stars in Hallmark movies. That is all I get. That is, I think, the more well-known Jill Wagner. And I just get her messages, basically.
There's you, the Hallmark movie actress, and the Wagner Group.
All right, now staying with business, here's some more news from Axios. The auto industry beginning to crank out more electric vehicles, but there is one problem. Not enough buyers. The growing mismatch between EV supply and demand is a sign that even though consumers are showing more interest in electric vehicles, they're still wary about purchasing one. Experts say it is a field of dreams moment for automakers that are making these big bets on electrification. So they built the cars, and now they're waiting for buyers to come. EV sales, which account for about 6.5% of the U.S. auto market so far this year, expected to surpass 1 million units for the first time in 2023. More than 30 new models are arriving this year. More than 50 new or updated models are coming in 2024. But sales just not keeping up with that increased output.
Yeah, so the supply in electric vehicles has swelled by 350% this year to more than 92,000 vehicles. Right now, they have a 92-day supply, roughly 3 months worth of electric vehicles, which is nearly twice the industry average. That's how long they're sitting on the lot here. By comparison, dealers have a relatively low 54 days worth of gas-powered vehicles. In normal times, it's a 70-day supply. So they're short on gas-powered vehicles. They're heavy on electric-powered vehicles. Luxury models, Audi has a couple, the electric Q4 and Q8. GMC has an electric Hummer, also have inventories up to 100 days. Price continues to remain an issue here. We've discussed it before. Also, chargers, a big issue for consumers. Until there's a real charging infrastructure out there, many consumers are wary unless they can afford having one in their garage, if they own a home, and they don't have to travel too far. Right now, many cars still come with pretty hefty price tags, making them ineligible for federal tax credits. They did pass some credits last year, but they're limited in how they will benefit things. It's something we've discussed on the podcast and the newsletter before, that in many cases, they only benefit cars with parts made here in America, and many parts, including the batteries, are still made abroad right now. So people are limited in terms of how much federal tax support and tax credits they can get, which is what has led to this oversupply in electric cars. One piece of good news, an analyst for Bank of America reports that charging infrastructure is coming. A lot more is coming with that bill that was passed last year with billions to put charging stations in place. And they believe that prices will reach parity with gas vehicles around 2025 as there's more infrastructure. So about 2 years away from the prices of EVs coming down and being about equal to gas vehicles.
From the Wall Street Journal, visitors to Disney theme parks this summer are encountering something that they haven't seen in a while. Elbow room. Travel analysts and advisors say that traffic to Disney's U.S. parks and some rival parks has slowed this summer. Data from a travel company that tracks line waiting time at Walt Disney World in Orlando shows that the Independence Day weekend was one of the slowest in nearly a decade. Disney execs have said they expected weaker earnings from their U.S. parks this year. The Orlando area resort even offering hotel discounts around Christmas. That's typically a peak period. Park visitors in recent weeks have had significantly lower wait times to get on rides. Analysts say shorter wait times generally correlate to smaller crowds. At Disney's Hollywood Studios theme park in Central Florida, home to blockbuster Star Wars attractions, July 4th was the third slowest day in the past year. Travel advisors and industry analysts say the slowdown, the latest sign that Disney's recent price hikes and changes to park operations have soured some families on visiting. At Disneyland in California, the company increased the cost of multi-day tickets by 9% or more in October, with the price of a 2-day ticket rising from $255 per adult to $285.
Yeah, Jill, so price is an issue here. Analysts also seeing that there's much more pent-up demand for cruises, for trips to Europe right now. Disney's been rolling out promotions to get people back in. Also to blame, some people say Florida's summer heat worse than ever. We've talked yesterday on the podcast about how this is the worst summer when it comes to heat, with the heat index exceeding 100 degrees on several days in July. So even too much by Florida summer standards. And then, of course, that's the politics element here. Disney has been in that fight back and forth with Ron DeSantis. So there are some people on the right, some conservatives, who've taken issue with the brand. And so whether that has impacted attendance is a question here as well. So a number of factors here. And so it'll remains to be seen when people want to return to the theme parks again. Certainly based on the prices right now in Europe and what people are saying, it does seem like a lot of people have shifted there and have decided to splurge on those types of vacations this summer. All right, now time for On This Day in History on this July 11th. Jill, we start in 1804. The site is Weehawken, New Jersey. Aaron Burr shoots Alexander Hamilton in a duel. If you've seen the show, if you've heard the soundtrack, if you've read the book, you're pretty familiar with this by now. This rivalry between Hamilton and Burr went back more than a decade. Hamilton helps effectively make Thomas Jefferson his rival, president 1800, to spite Burr. Then he blocks him out of being New York governor in 1804. Burr did not take kindly to any of this. By the way, Burr was vice president at this time. So as a sitting vice president, he hears that Alexander Hamilton is at a dinner party and calling him a dangerous man and saying nasty things about him. Burr writes him a letter saying, "Is this true? I need you to recant this." Hamilton says, "Hell no, I can't recant this." Burr challenges him to a duel. Hamilton does not want to be in a duel. Why? Because Hamilton's son had died in a duel 3 years previous But Hamilton felt he had to go through with it. And so they met in Weehawken on this day in 1804, and Aaron Burr shoots Alexander Hamilton, a sitting vice president, killing the former Treasury Secretary in New Jersey. Jill, I presume you've seen the Broadway show by now?
I have seen it just via Disney Plus, never in person. But that was must-see TV, if you remember, during the pandemic. Best seats in the house, right on your couch. I assume you've seen it in person.
Oh, Jill, I paid an ungodly amount of money when it was trendy to go see it in 2015. All right, to the 20th century now. On this day in 1914, Babe Ruth, the greatest Yankee of all time, actually made his baseball debut. Many baseball fans will know this as a Boston Red Sox. All right, a bit of book and music news here. On this day in 1960, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is first published. And Jill, do you remember this theme song? Like a butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high.
Reading Rainbow.
Do a book. Da-da-da.
I'm having flashbacks to elementary school.
You got it. Reading Rainbow turns 40 years old today. It premiered on this day in 1983 with LeVar Burton. This was a book that made a push for reading. Many kids, children of the 80s and 90s might remember it. It actually aired for 23 years, Jill, from 1983 to 2006. And on this day in 1995, Jill, many people said hello to Shaggy.
It wasn't me.
It Wasn't Me doesn't come out yet. Today, on this day in history, he releases Boombastic. We could call it Breakthrough album. And then a couple years later, we get to It Wasn't Me and a couple of his biggest hits in the early 2000s. But on this day in 95, Shaggy, whose real name is Oliver Burrell, releases Boombastic.
Somehow that Oliver Burrell is just not quite as fun.
Right? It doesn't work when it's like Oliver Burrell. It's like Shaggy. Burrell.
Yeah.
No, it's that's why he went with DJ Shaggy. Good for Shaggy.
All right, but it is the real Jill Wagner and the real Mo Shwanunu, not stage names. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store so we can continue to grow.
Do you think I would ever pick Mo Shwanunu as a stage name, Jill? There's like 1.5 million easier names than my name. Maybe I should talk to Shaggy about what's available out there right now. But no, I'm proud of my name. I'm happy with my name. Jill, I want to thank everyone for joining Mo News Premium in recent days. We have a new podcast out there. By the way, we should remind folks today, first day of 2 days of Amazon Prime, first day of 3 days of Walmart Plus. I imagine those who know already know and are already doing their buying as they listen to this podcast. We have an interview over on the Members Only Mo News Premium podcast about all things Amazon and Walmart that I think you guys will find very interesting. You can head over now to mo.news/premium to support this account, join as a monthly member, annual member, and get access to those extra podcasts and our Members Only Instagram account.
All right, bye, everybody.
Later.